For every player who built generational wealth playing in the NBA, there's another who burned through fortunes most of us can't even imagine. Today we're breaking down the wildest financial downfalls in NBA history, starting with Delonte West. Understanding how it came down to this requires tracing it back to when things first started going south for him. West's problems started long before the money ever came in. He had battled mental health struggles, including a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, and those challenges only grew under the constant pressure of professional basketball. While his teammates and coaches praised his toughness on the court, behind the scenes he was fighting demons only a few people understood. After bouncing around the league, his final NBA stint came in 2013 with the Dallas Mavericks, and after the team released him, he never found his way back to the league, despite being 28 years old. With no steady income, his savings began to shrink, but the real breaking point was his battle with substance addiction. This, combined with untreated mental health issues, pulled him further away from stability. Suddenly, headlines started painting him not as the former NBA guard, who once battled LeBron James in the playoffs, but a man fighting just to survive. By the late 2010s, disturbing videos circulated online of West appearing disoriented, sometimes barefoot, often in public confrontations.
Man, I walked down the street. The man approached me with a gun.
Where's his gun at?
I don't give a fuck.
Okay. Do you know where his gun is?
I don't give a fuck.
For many fans, it was shocking to see someone who once thrived on the NBA stage reduced to homelessness. Despite this, there have been attempts to turn things around for him. In 2020, then Mavericks owner Mark Cuban personally stepped in, picking West up at a Dallas gas station and helping him enter rehab. And for a moment, it looked like a comeback might be possible, but the road has remained brutally difficult.
In Florida, and it's like a farm, Jason Williams, and he's making progress, sending pictures. Dante's emailing me, and I'm like, oh yeah, we're getting this. Then Dante throws his shit over the fence, disappears. We bring him back again.
As recently as November 2024, reports surfaced of West being arrested after a breaking and entering incident, which is a tragic reminder that his struggles are far from over. And the same can be said about Joe Smith, who made more than triple of what West earned, only to see it disappear just as fast, if not faster. Back in 1995, Smith was the #1 overall pick in the draft, taken ahead of stars like Kevin Garnett and Rasheed Wallace.
First pick in the 1995 NBA draft, the Golden State Warriors select Joe Smith from the University of Maryland.
Expectations for him were sky high, and while he never became a superstar, he had a very successful and long career by playing for 12 different NBA teams over 16 years and earning $61 million in salary alone along the way. For most people, that's more than enough to secure several lifetimes of financial stability, but for Joe Smith, it wasn't, because he made multiple bad decisions, starting with lifestyle inflation. Smith admitted that as the money rolled in, so did the spending on luxury cars, including a Corvette, Bentley, and 2 Range Rovers. He also bought multiple homes, and would buy a new home each time he moved teams. His luxury lifestyle, however, came with a life lesson that he'd end up learning the hard way.
You know, like you said, when you're that young, you're thinking it's just gonna keep going and keep lasting forever. But to all the future NBA, NFL players out there, man, just know that you have to be aware and watch every dime, every nickel, every penny.
Unlike the stars with max contracts and endorsements, Smith's income didn't match his expenses. Now, Smith's lifestyle wasn't the only bad financial decision he made. He also made bad investments by putting money into shady businesses that eventually turned into lawsuits. By the time his career was coming to an end, the financial reality of his mistakes hit hard. And in 2018, just 8 years after retiring, Joe Smith filed for bankruptcy with $157,000 in debt. The former #1 pick, who made tens of millions in the league, had almost nothing left to show for it. Joe Smith's downfall showed how overspending and bad investments can quietly chip away at a $61 million fortune. But while he lost his money gradually, the next player's collapse came from one of the worst decisions an athlete can ever make. Eddie Curry was drafted straight out of high school by the Chicago Bulls with the 4th overall pick in 2001.
With the 4th pick in the 2001 NBA draft, the Chicago Bulls select Eddie Curry.
He had the size, touch, and athleticism that drew instant comparisons to Shaquille O'Neal, with scouts even calling him Baby Shaq. And in his first few years, he proved that nickname wasn't a mistake. He averaged double figures in scoring and looked like a centerpiece for Chicago's rebuild. By the mid-2000s, he'd play his way into a massive payday as the New York Knicks signed him to a 6-year, $60 million contract. At just 22 years old, Eddie Curry was rich beyond imagination, but behind the scenes, his financial foundation was already crumbling. Curry lived an extremely extravagant lifestyle, spending money on things he didn't need like luxury cars, a $1 million mansion, and designer jewelry, just to name a few. But that wasn't all. Things started going downhill for him after his accountant made some questionable decisions.
My accountant wasn't doing what he was supposed to do. He had loans here and there. Biggest factors in my financial just ruin, bro, is that I gave someone power of attorney. He took out a loan. He used a stamp of my signature to get the loan. He defaulted on the loan. I didn't even know about it, didn't get the proceeds from it or anything. They ended up taking me to court. It was like a $500,000 loan. I ended up having to pay like $4 million on this loan.
And that was just one loan. Over time, Curry borrowed millions more at high interest. He moved from spending his salary to stacking debt on top of it. Almost simultaneously, his career began to fall apart. Conditioning issues, heart concerns, and injuries kept him from ever becoming the star many people expected. By the late 2000s, his role in the league had shrunk, and with it, his earning power. But while the NBA paycheck slowed down, the loans and lawsuits didn't. When 2009 came around, multiple creditors were in court, suing him for millions in unpaid loans. And legal documents revealed the extent of his financial troubles, with enormous debts, homes at risk of foreclosure, and creditors fighting to seize whatever assets he had left. Eddie became a cautionary tale of the baby Shaq who never got to grow to his full potential due to the poor financial choices he made. Now, unlike Eddie, Vin Baker's financial collapse came from watching his $100 million career disappear to alcohol and bad decisions. Vin Baker was supposed to be one of the most iconic faces of the NBA in the late 90s, a four-time All-Star, an Olympic gold medalist in 2000, and a player who signed a $86.6 million contract with the Seattle Supersonics. Baker had all the makings of a long, legendary career. But his story is also one of the clearest examples of how NBA wealth can evaporate, even for the brightest stars. And at the center of it all was alcohol. Baker started drinking during his playing days, at first in small amounts, but it soon spiraled out of control.
I became addicted to alcohol.
He admitted to drinking before games, hiding bottles in hotel rooms, and using alcohol as a way to cope with stress and pressure. What started as a private struggle eventually began to affect his performance on the court. When he joined the Boston Celtics in 2002, his career was already going downhill. By 2004, the Celtics had suspended him for violating the NBA's substance and abuse policy. And not long after, Baker's playing days were effectively over. But what people didn't know was that while losing his career, Baker was also losing his money. Despite earning over $100 million in salary and endorsements, Baker blew through nearly all of it by spending recklessly, engaging in failed business transactions, and trusting the wrong people. At one point, he tried to open a chain of restaurants with investors, but the businesses collapsed, taking millions of his fortune with them. And by the time his NBA checks stopped coming, Baker was buried in debt. But his rock bottom didn't come until years later, when he was spotted working at Starbucks because he needed the money. Today, though, Vin Baker became one of the few that has turned their life around. He's been sober for years, and has actually written a memoir about his struggles. And now he works as an assistant coach for the Milwaukee Bucks, preaching the lessons he learned the hard way. Vin Baker's downfall showed how addiction can strip away even a $100 million fortune. But for Shawn Kemp, the problem wasn't alcohol or bad loans. It was simply too many responsibilities stacked on top of a lavish lifestyle. In the 1990s, few players electrified crowds like the Rain Man. He was a 6-time All-Star and the face of the Seattle Supersonics alongside Gary Payton. At his peak, Kemp signed deals that pushed his career earnings into the tens of millions. By all accounts, he should have been set for life, but he wasn't, thanks to numerous financial obligations that were too much for his NBA paycheck to keep up with. The first and most well-known being his child support obligations. Kemp reportedly had at least 7 children with 6 different women, and each of those relationships came with significant financial responsibilities. His monthly payments stacked up, and over time, they consumed a large portion of his income. In addition to trying to meet up with this, Kemp loved to live big. He spent on cars, jewelry, and a lavish lifestyle, which kept his money flowing out out almost as fast as it came in, and unlike some of his peers, he never had the massive max contracts of the modern era. So while his career earnings were substantial, they weren't enough to cover unchecked spending forever. Then there were also the substance abuse issues, as well as the injuries and conditioning problems that forced his career as well as his paychecks to end. Eventually, like so many athletes who go down this path, Kemp found himself struggling to keep up. Although he's tried to reinvent himself by becoming a part owner of restaurants and more recently investing in cannabis businesses, he still hasn't been able to leave his problems in the past. And as of May this year, he pleaded guilty to an assault charge in a 2023 shooting. Shawn lost his money because he dealt with more than he could handle, but this next player lost it all because he lived life too fast and too loud. Dennis Rodman was never like anyone else. On the court, he was a Hall of Fame defender, a relentless rebounder, and a 5-time NBA champion who helped power the Chicago Bulls dynasty of the 1990s.
Rodman tips it in!
Off the court, he was a cultural icon with neon hair, piercings, tattoos, and a wild streak that made him a tabloid fixture. Over the course of his 14-year NBA career, Rodman earned around $27 million in salary, not counting endorsements. For most people, that's generational wealth, but for Rodman, it wasn't nearly enough to sustain this lifestyle he built. Rodman had a habit of spending recklessly. He lived like a rock star, wearing nothing but designer clothes, driving luxury cars only, and having wild parties and expensive nights out almost every day. At one point, his publicist estimated he was spending tens of thousands per month just on partying. Then there were the legal troubles. Rodman was married 3 times to Annie Bakes, Carmen Electra, and Michelle Moy, and these relationships left him with heavy child support and alimony obligations. By the early 2000s, court records showed he was falling behind on payments, and at one point, he was accused of owing hundreds of thousands in unpaid child and spousal support. To add to this, he also had his struggles with alcohol abuse, which not only hurt his post-playing opportunities, but also led to arrests and rehab stints that cost even more money. He developed a very unpredictable behavior, which led him to walk out on interviews, clash with coaches, and disappear for days, making him a hard sell for stable endorsement deals. And for his financial advisor, the very person he trusted to help manage his money, added to his problem by stealing a whopping $1.24 million from him. Now, unlike other stars, Rodman didn't have business ventures or smart investments to fall back on. Instead, he leaned on celebrity appearances, reality TV shows, and even professional wrestling to make ends meet. But those checks were small compared to the NBA paydays, and they couldn't keep up with his lifestyle or debts. By the 2010s, reports surfaced that Rodman was essentially broke, with his lawyers telling courts he was extremely sick and unable to pay mounting child support bills. But while Rodman's millions slipped away through years of reckless spending, this next player shows what happens when an accident can ruin your entire fortune. Most people would agree that Darius Miles was a talented star long before he stepped on the NBA court. In 2000, at just 18 years old, Miles became the first player ever drafted straight out of high school by the LA Clippers, going 3rd overall in the draft.
With the 3rd pick in the 2000 NBA draft, the Los Angeles Clippers select Darius Miles of East St. Louis High School.
He was supposed to be the face of the league's next generation, not to mention he was athletic, versatile, and marketable. Miles signed endorsement deals and immediately started earning millions. And over his career, he would go on to make more than $60 million in salary alone. By the mid-2000s, injuries began to ruin everything, and a devastating knee injury in 2006 was the beginning of the end. By 2009, after a failed comeback attempt with the Memphis Grizzlies, his NBA career was over at just 27 years old. That's when the real problems began. Without the steady paycheck of an NBA contract, Miles' financial reality came crashing down. Darius Miles himself admitted in interviews that he wasn't financially prepared for life after basketball. He overspent, made bad investments in real estate, bad business ventures, and entertainment projects, to name a few, and the results never matched the millions he poured in. Miles also admitted he had little understanding of how fast the money could vanish. Without a budget and with no one stepping in to rein him in, the fortune he built as a teenager evaporated within years. In 2016, Miles eventually filed for bankruptcy, listing more than $12 million in debts and less than $500,000 in assets. Among his debts were unpaid taxes, legal disputes, and massive loans he couldn't cover. In court filings, he listed owning just $1,700 in his checking account, along with a handful of assets. all of which were nothing but a small reminder of how far he'd fallen from his multi-million-dollar lifestyle. Darius Miles may have lost his fortune because injuries cut his earnings short, but Gilbert Arenas had over $160 million and still managed to burn through it all, with reckless spending and bad investments. If there's one player whose financial collapse matches his on-court persona, it's Gilbert Arenas. Agent Zero earned more than $160 million in NBA contracts and endorsements. By all accounts, he should have never had to worry about being broke ever again. But just like his fearless playing style, Arenas lived with no breaks when it came to money. At the peak of his career with the Washington Wizards, Arenas was one of the highest paid players in the league, and he spent like it. Reports say he once kept a garage full of exotic cars, owned a massive shark tank, and dropped 6 figures on custom outfits and jewelry without blinking. The only problem with all of this was that the money going out was outpacing the money coming in. Now, it wasn't just overspending that wrecked Arenas' finances, it was bad investments. Arenas admitted to pouring millions into ventures he barely researched, including real estate deals that collapsed during the 2008 financial crisis. He trusted the wrong people, signed onto the wrong projects, and lost chunks of his fortune in the process. And then came the fallout from his infamous locker room gun incident in 2009, where he and Javaris Crittenton pulled guns on each other. Not only did it derail his career, but it also cost him sponsorships and endorsements that could have cushioned his financial future. By the time his massive $111 million contract with the Wizards was being stretched out and paid off, Arenas was already fighting to stay afloat. By the mid-2010s, reports surfaced that Arenas was facing foreclosure on his mansion, while also dealing with IRS issues and even fighting lawsuits tied to failed investments. His once massive fortune had been drained by a combination of extravagant spending, poor financial decisions, and the sudden decline of his NBA career. Despite all this, many people believed he still hasn't learned his lesson. Barely a few weeks ago, he was arrested in connection with a federal indictment that alleges he hosted illegal high-stakes poker games at his mansion in Encino, California, and he was officially charged with 1 count of conspiracy to operate an illegal gambling business, and 1 count of making false statements to federal investigators. Gilbert Arenas lost his fortune by burning through it with wild spending and bad investments. But unlike Gilbert, the next player's bank balance disappeared not because he overspent, but because he voluntarily turned down money. Latrell Sprewell's story is one of the most infamous financial collapses in NBA history. Over the course of his career, Sprewell made close to $100 million between NBA salaries and endorsements. He was a 4-time All-Star, a member of the All-NBA team, and even helped lead the New York Knicks to the 1999 NBA Finals. For a while, he was one of the most electrifying guards in the league. But for Sprewell, the collapse wasn't about gambling or shady investments. It was about pride, ego, and one very bad decision. In 2004, Sprewell was 34 years old, playing for the Minnesota Timberwolves. The team had just made a deep playoff run alongside Kevin Garnett, and management wanted to keep the core intact, so they offered Sprewell a 3-year, $21 million contract extension. For most players at his age, that was a blessing, but not for Sprewell. When reporters asked about the deal, he said, "I've got a family to feed." And that one sentence changed everything. The comment was blasted across headlines, late-night talk shows, and sports media. It became a symbol of greed and entitlement, especially since $21 million was more money than most people could dream of in a lifetime. But beyond the backlash, the real damage was that Sprewell turned down the deal. He believed he was worth much more, and when the Timberwolves refused to increase their offer, he let his contract expire. The problem now was that no other team wanted him. At 34, he was seen as declining, high maintenance, and unwilling to accept a smaller role. That $21 million ended up being his last real NBA contract offer. He had already developed a reputation for living large, a 70-foot yacht worth over $1.5 million, multiple luxury cars and mansions in both Wisconsin and New York. By 2007, it all started crumbling. His yacht was repossessed by the bank, 2 of his homes went into foreclosure, and court documents revealed that unpaid debts were piling up. It was a stunning fall for a man who just 3 years earlier was offered generational wealth. He faded away from the league entirely, remembered more for the way he walked away from millions than for the years he dominated on the court. Latrell Sprewell's downfall came from refusing the money that could have secured his future, but Antoine Walker's story was the exact opposite. He He made over $100 million in his career and still managed to lose it all. Over the course of his 12-year NBA career, Antoine Walker earned more than $108 million in salary alone, not even counting endorsements. He was a 3-time All-Star, an NBA champion with the Miami Heat in 2006, and for a time, one of the most versatile forwards in the league. But just 2 years after playing his final NBA game, Walker was completely broke, and by 2010, he was filing for bankruptcy, buried under more than $12 million in debt. So how does someone go from $100 million to nothing? With Walker, it was a perfect mix of reckless spending, bad investments, and a lifestyle that never slowed down. Walker came into the league in 1996, drafted 6th overall by the Boston Celtics.
With the 6th pick in the 1996 NBA draft, the Boston Celtics select Antoine Walker from the University of Kentucky.
By his second season, he was already an all-star, and with his new money came a taste for luxury. He quickly became known for living big, buying multiple mansions across the country, owning a fleet of luxury cars, Bentleys, Mercedes, Escalades, and spending on lavish jewelry and designer clothes.
I had 5 or 6 different cars, but I had the most expensive cars. When you're talking about Bentleys, Maybachs, Mercedes-Benz, so a lot of high-end things. I was into designer watches, Rolexes, timeless pieces that you can have forever. So I was into those type of things.
But it wasn't just for himself. Walker had a large entourage of family, friends, and hangers-on who depended on him financially. He was generous to a fault, constantly covering expenses, buying homes, and taking care of everyone around him. At one point, Walker admitted he was supporting dozens of people at once. But the biggest leak in Walker's bank account was gambling. He became a regular in casinos, especially in Las Vegas and Atlantic City. Reports suggest Walker lost millions at the blackjack tables, often playing with high-stakes bets night after night.
We would go, different places throughout the United States, and I would travel with a big group of guys. I would travel with 8 to 10 people with me and pay for their flights, hotel rooms, eating on the road. So you had those combinations of things, we used to have real big bills at the end of those trips.
He even got himself arrested in 2009 for writing nearly $1 million in bad checks to cover casino debts. And that arrest showed everyone just how far Walker's finances had spiraled out of control. On top of the gambling, Walker tried to grow his fortune through real estate and business ventures. But instead of multiplying his money, the investments collapsed during the 2008 financial crisis. He had put tens of millions into housing developments that went under when the market crashed. One after another, his projects failed, leaving him with debt he couldn't cover. By 2010, just 4 years after winning an NBA title, Walker filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Court documents showed he had less than $5 million in assets, but over $12 million in liabilities. And his championship ring was auctioned off to help pay creditors. However, to his credit, Walker has since tried to rebuild. After bankruptcy, he played briefly in the D-League, but the NBA never called him back. His downfall showed how bad investments and gambling can wipe out even a $100 million fortune. However, Allen Iverson made double that amount and still ended up broke. Few players in NBA history captured the culture the way Allen Iverson did. The answer wasn't just a basketball star, he was a global icon. Over a 14-year career, he earned an estimated $200 million between NBA salaries and endorsements, making him one of the highest paid players of his generation. Yet by the early 2010s, Al was being sued for unpaid debts, evicted from homes, and described in court as broke. And his problems started with his legendary lifestyle. From the day he entered the league in 1996, he spent like the money would never stop flowing. He reportedly bought multiple luxury cars throughout his career, Lamborghinis, Bentleys, and custom rides, sometimes giving them away to friends on a whim. And the spending didn't stop there. Al dropped millions on chains, watches, and diamonds, and there were rumors that he traveled with entire suitcases full of jewelry. Outside his physical possession, Al had an expensive nightlife and could blow tens of thousands in a single night on bottles and entertainment. And his former teammate Matt Barnes once said he'd throw $30,000, $40,000 every time he went. I'm like, you realize what I can do with this money? And on top of all this, Al carried a massive entourage covering travel, shopping, and living expenses for friends and family. Meanwhile, as all this was going on, behind the scenes, Al was dealing with multiple lawsuits, including unpaid debts to jewelers, casinos, and creditors. And in 2012, 2012, a judge in Georgia seized his bank accounts after he failed to pay a $900,000 jewelry bill. He was also evicted from a mansion after falling behind on mortgage payments, and court records at the time painted a bleak picture that Al was broke, with little income, and drowning in legal bills. Not just from his bad decisions, but also from his messy split from Tawana Turner. But here's where Al's story takes a surprising twist. Back in 2001, during the height of his fame, Reebok signed Al to a lifetime contract. As part of the deal, they created a trust fund worth $32 million, money Al couldn't touch until he turned 55 in 2030. That trust fund, along with an annual lifelong $800,000 stipend from Reebok, is essentially what's protecting Al from total financial ruin today. So while the world saw Al hit rock bottom in the early 2010s, his financial story isn't fully closed, and he still has millions waiting for the rest of his life. If you enjoyed our video, don't forget to subscribe.